our second in the series of this webinar to look at our Western District projects. Today, we're going to be looking at our award-winning projects in the planning and traffic engineering categories. We are joined today by Ali, Trevor, and Chris. I should have introduced myself first. My name is Kimberly Leung. I am the Western District Past President and also the Livable Streets Director at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. Before we get started, I thought it may be fun just to hear from each of our panelists today about what they're most excited about for the holiday season. I'm glad so many of you are able to join us as you're getting ready for the holidays. So I'm going to throw it over to Ali really quick. What are you looking forward to most for the holiday season?
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. I have my mom here in San Diego with us, and we are going to some short trips around San Diego, and I'm very excited for that, doing that in the holidays.
Oh, that sounds so wonderful. And then how about going over to our folks in Seattle, Chris and Trevor? What are you looking forward to most for the holiday season?
Well, I'm going to be traveling to where I grew up in Texas, kind of North Texas, spend some time with my mom on about 20 acres of land and just catch up with her and take a look at all of our bright futures.
Wonderful.
And I'm just excited. Normally in previous years, we've had snow at Christmas, so I'm usually working 12-hour shifts. So it doesn't look like we're going to have snow this year, so I'm excited about that. And other than that, just sticking around Seattle and hanging out with my two kids and my wife, and hopefully having a great time.
Sounds like everyone's gonna have a lot of family time. I'm looking forward to like sleeping and just resting, just from the crazy year that we've all had.
It's a great idea.
So why don't we jump right into our presentations for today? So what we're going to do is that we're going to hear from both of our, or all three of our presenters today, and then we'll do the question and answer at the very end. So for those of you that are joining us for the webinar today, you can go ahead and put your questions below. There's a Q&A function, and we'll be sure to answer all of those at the end of the webinar. So first up, we have Ali Ahmadi, who is a senior transportation engineer and planner from Fehr and Peers. He's been at the San Diego office for 7 years, and he's had 7 years of industry and academic research experience in transportation planning. So Ali is passionate about data and has developed skills in web tool development, big data analytics, and geoprocessing workflow development, which he has applied on projects such as the City of San Diego Mobility Evaluation Tool, which is what we'll be hearing about today. Ali has a bachelor's in civil engineering and a master's in transportation engineering from San Diego State University. So at this time, I'll hand it over to Ali.
All right. Thank you, Kimberly. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Do you see my screen fine?
Yep, it looks perfect.
All right, perfect. So today I'm going to be talking about the City of San Diego Mobility Evaluation Tool. And the outline of this presentation is briefly talking about the vehicle miles traveled concept, VMTs, some of you might be familiar with. And then we're going to talk about some of the key features of the tool, the workflow development of the tool. We're going to talk about some of the limitations. And at the end, I'm planning to show or do a quick demo of the tool. So starting with the vehicle miles traveled. So vehicle miles traveled, or in short, VMT, is a metric that's used to measure the total distance traveled by vehicles within a specific geographic area. It could be the city, region, county, and it could also be calculated over a period of time. And the concept is pretty simple. If you look at the graphic on the right, if you have one vehicle that travels 1 mile, you have generated 1 VMT. And if you have 4 vehicles, each driving or traveling 10 miles, then you have generated 40 VMTs. So VMT provides different insights into kind of the transportation of a project where you can look at the level of vehicle activity, the travel demand, the congestion levels. It could be information used for transportation infrastructure needs, into environmental impacts, and also the energy consumptions associated with traveling in a region. So the purpose of there are some goals that we were trying to achieve with this tool, and the main one is that it's a tool that semi-automates the vehicle travel screening. And what we mean by screening is basically when a new project developed in, say, City of San Diego, they're gonna have a new VMT associated with their project, and that VMT changes based on the context of the project, based on the land use type or the location of the project. And when the VMT of a project is calculated, a couple scenarios could happen. Sometimes some of the projects, some classes of projects are screened out from VMT analysis. Those are set aside. But when a project needs to calculate VMT, there are two main scenarios. Either they're below the threshold of the region or they are above the thresholds of the region. So if they're below the thresholds of the region, that's good. This means that they're within the VMT limits of the region, and they don't have a lot of things to do on this tool. But when they are above the threshold, which means that they have VMT impacts, then that's where this tool would be super helpful to calculate their VMT reductions. And what we mean by VMT reduction is basically the measures a project introduces to reduce their VMT impact. And those measures, there are several measures. The measures that we have quantified in the San Diego tool comes from the CAPCO GHG handbook, which has a number of TDM measures, and they have quantification methods for each of those measures. And we have, through conversations with the City of San Diego, we have a subset of those measures that are selected to that were selected to be implemented in the tool, which will take a look at in the next slide. But before that, the other item that was important achieving through this tool was that previously projects going into this kind of like the permitting process, they have to submit this project information form through PDF documents, and there was a lot of back and forth between the city and consultants on like what information should be corrected or not. And this tool actually takes that into a digital format where a lot of the information is already pre-populated, so it makes it easier for developers to, or basically the project sponsors to kind of feed that information out. And the last is that the City of San Diego has a mobility choice ordinance tracking process where they have divided the city into multiple areas, and based on the area that you fall into, you have to obtain certain number of points to comply with this ordinance. And basically what we'll show at the end is that this tool takes care of that as well. So there are multiple things through the process that kind of consolidated into a single tool. So the VMT reduction measures that I previously mentioned were from CAPCO. So we had a selection of the TDM measures from the CAPCO that were implemented into this tool. Some of them apply to residential projects, some employee project, and some of them apply to the commute trips related to a project. Typical users of the tool would be the agency staff, transportation consultants, environmental consultants, developers, usually through consultants. And the type of projects that it would apply to are typical residential, commercial employment, in the typical industrial, public facilities, and retail spaces. So to achieve this goal, we had to first fully understand what the City of San Diego's process is and kind of merge these couple pieces together. So what we did was that we sat with the City of San Diego folks, and we put together a flow chart of like how different elements interact together, and that defines how the tool how the workflow of the tool should be. And I mean, this is a more detailed format, but we have a simplified version. So basically there are multiple steps in the tool. You have the applicant go in, select their project area, and then they fill out the project information form, which is information about the project. Some of it is pre-populated based on the regional data available. And there is a VMT reduction calculator element where applicant goes in and basically puts in the measures they are intending to implement and calculate the reduction achieved through those measures. And the last is the mobility choices ordinance tracking. That's a City of San Diego specific regulation that needs to be complied with by projects. And then at the end, a report is generated, which is basically shared with the city. So there are several things that go and basically use in the development of this tool. So the basic of it is basically we start with the City of San Diego parcel layer. There are a bunch of Python scripts tools that run in the backend of the tool. And then there is the user interface where all the applicant will be spending their time inputting the information. We have the San Diego's regional travel demand model baked into the back end of the tool to do the calculations, and there needs to be servers to host these data layers, geoprocessing services, and at the end there are a number of background layers that are used, some of them just for information only, and some of them are used in the backend calculations. And at the end, with all the tools, there are some limitations. So one of the limitations of the City of San Diego's tool is that it's based on the existing land uses. So there are some type of projects that are large enough that could impact things on a larger scale. So those are, I think actually the guideline is that if the project generates more than 2,400 ADT or daily trips to the site, and they need to be analyzed separately through running it through the regional travel demand model versus coming into this tool. The other limitation is that for some of the project, usually if it's large enough and it spans across multiple census tracts, then this tool might not be helpful, or the project should be broken down to analyze each piece of project in each census tract. But that's kind of a rare case. The project has to be like super large, and they usually don't come to this tool if it gets to that scale. And the last piece is that the tool, because of some of the limitation, the tool does not store any information. So once the user uses a tool and they exit the tool, all they have is the report at the end. But the important thing is that with that report, they can regenerate the whole process, just putting in all the inputs. But this basically the city doesn't store any of the information that are entered into this tool. So with that, I'm just going to quickly switch to the tool and quickly show a demo of how it works. So I'm gonna stop share and then share my other screen. Okay, do you see my screen fine? Okay, good. Okay, so when you enter the tool, sorry, I'm just gonna move the Zoom windows. So basically when you enter the tool, there's a welcome page, there's some instructions and information that's provided to the user. And here what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna go near the water. I like to stay close to the water. So I'm just gonna pick a couple parcels that are next to water. And I picked this area because I wanna show the full capabilities of the tool. So I wanna go do everything that is possible to do. So I'm gonna select a number of parcels here. If you look at here, there's an information button. So each parcel, there's information associated with it, which TAZ number it's located in, the community plan area, the census tract number, and also the VMT per capita and VMT per employee numbers associated with the census tract that the project falls into. And then on the bottom, we have a number of other layers that the users can turn on and off. So for example, transit priority area. So for example, this project is in a transit priority area. And then we have, for example, you can turn on the TAZ layers to see where your project is located at. And with that, I'm going to go to the next page, which is the project information form. So again, this was previously done. This was kind of like a manual process, but here we have a process that pre-populates and checks some of the information. So kind of reduces room for error. But I'm just going to do a quick example project. So I'm going to call it my mixed use project. And then here we'll put a short description. So I'll put a sample description would go here. And then the project type, because I want to go into the VMT reduction, I'm going to select the discretionary project because ministerial projects doesn't need to go through um, basically the VMT screening. But when you select discretionary, there's other information you have to populate. So I'm just going to go quickly, say 100 parking spaces, let's say 20 accessible parking here. I'm gonna put 25 bike and maybe 5 motorcycle parkings. And we are gonna use the TDM calculator to calculate our VMT reductions. And our project, say we have 50 dwelling units, we're gonna call 20% affordable housing and 80% market rate. Let's say we have a commercial area of 4,500 square foot, and this project, let's say we don't have any industrial or retail space. And then on the right side, there are some checks that we needs to be done. So for example, we'll say that the project does not, so basically let's assume this project is bigger than what is already in that land use, or basically it's gonna increase the number of the trips. So the answer is no there. We have affordable is not 100%, so we're gonna say no. And then the project doesn't meet any of these other screening criteria. And basically what happens is that we have the table here. The project VMT is calculated at about 18.4 based on the census tract that it falls to, and that's for the residential component. For the commercial is 20.3, and if you look at it, the thresholds of the region are lower, so in both cases we have VMT impacts. So now, because we have VMT impacts, we go to the next step, which is VMT reduction calculator. So I'm going to go in and select a number of measures that I want to apply to my project. So I have affordable, I have 20% affordable housing, so we'll check the box for that. And for the commercial employments, let's assume we're going to implement a voluntary a commute trip reduction program, and let's say 50% of the employees are applicable or eligible to participate in that program. So we picked our measures. Now, if you click continue, it's going to do the calculations. It usually takes 5-10 seconds. And it's going to basically go to the next step, which is the compliance with the mobility choices ordinance tracking process. So right now, we got the message that was successful. Our project, I have pre-selected the project. So our project is mobility zone 2, and the city requires that the project obtains at least 5 points. So there are measures here that the applicant can apply to collect those points. So I'm gonna pick a number of them. Let's say we are gonna have, let's say there's gonna be a raised crosswalk. So we have one raised crosswalk there. We're gonna have some pedestrian countdowns. Let's say 1 pedestrian countdowns. So that's 4.5 points. And let's pick another one. I'm gonna go down. Let's say we of the bicycle parkings, we have 5 that are electric bicycle charging stations. So I get 2 more points for that. And then at the end, you can see we have 6.5 points, and we can continue to the next step. So once that's done, then we get to the final stage, which is the report. So the report has where is the project site, the the parcels that were selected, the thresholds. It has information on the model version that was used in the process. And then we go down. We have the project information form here. It's populated by the information from the user on the sizes, parking, and some of the screening questions. And then we have the summary table of the VMT numbers here, where we had VMT impacts. And then down below, we have our calculation results. So because we had integrated affordable housing, we get 5.72% reduction on the residential uses. And on the other component, which was a commercial, we have implemented commute trip reduction program, which gives us another, not another 2%, but 2% on the employee VMT, reduction on the employee VMT. And then at the end, you can see here, VMT after reduction is 17.35, which is below the threshold. And for the commercial space, it's 19.89. And then we go further down, there's a table which shows what measures were used to accumulate points for the mobility choices ordinance tracking process. So we have a summary of that, and it also shows everything, so you can kind of see like what other things could have been selected that was not selected. And then the applicant would share this report with the city to basically go through their VMT screening process. Other options available in the tool is that you can navigate through the tool at any time, so you can return to different pages and run through things again. There is a link to the CAPCO document here, which will take you to the CAPCO handbook, and there's also a report a problem feature. If users come across any issues, they can share it with the city who is now hosting the tool online. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing here. And then I'll pass it back to you, Kimberly.
Thank you so much, Ollie. That was so great to see that tool. And I know we have a question in the chat, but we'll save it until the very end after we get through our next presentation as well. So let me just pull my screen back up here for all of you. So our next presentation are from some folks from the Seattle Department of Transportation. We have Chris and Trevor here with us today. So Chris is the lead for Seattle's freight program. He holds a degree in business management and is a professional engineer registered in Washington State. His career has ranged from fieldwork to project design. As part of the Seattle DOT, he has worked at the University of Washington to develop foundational research into urban goods movement known as the Final 50 Feet suite of projects on which he has spoken domestically and internationally. He's also joined by Trevor Partap. Trevor holds a degree in civil engineering and business administration and is a professional engineer in the state of Washington. He has been with the Seattle DOT for nearly 25 years, holding a variety of different roles in traffic operations, pavement management, planning, design, and construction, in addition to project management. He also takes on various special projects like planning for FIFA 2026 and overnight truck tractor parking, it's a mouthful to say, which we're about to hear more about. So I'm going to hand it over to Trevor and Chris to talk about their dedicated overnight truck tractor parking in Harbor Island.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to set up the share in just a moment here, wherever it went. We've had the same problem before. There. Great. It'll take me a moment because there, I think we've got that going at this point in time. Thanks a lot. So what we ended up doing, and the reason there are two of us presenting at this point in time, is because like many of the things that happen within transportation, nobody ever does anything alone. As we went through a lot of iterations for needs of parking in the industrial area, we came to understand a lot of our really unique operations that occur in and around port cities with railroads, and came up with a concept of truck tractor parking. And while I would like to say it was all me, it wasn't. And the amount of work that went into legislation and the initial installation was really leaning a lot on Trevor. So I want to make sure that when we talk about this, like everything else, it's not a one person, one thing type of operation. So what we're going to talk about, just a quick little listing, is kind of how we did it, what kind of factors we went through, how we came into the pilot, and what the impacts were as we began to bring this out to the public. So given that truck tractor parking, it's a mouthful even for me too, is not insanely common or considered, I want to make sure that you have an idea of what happens with the kind of in the background of our own supply chain and delivery systems. The slide kind of says it, there are 2 million registered US freighters, but the vast majority of them, 1.5 million of them, are just single unit operators. That's just this one person with their truck. And if we bring this down to the city level, our estimates from talks with port and other operators, we need somewhere between 500 and 900 truck parking spaces, not just for the short haul truckers, but for long haul truckers. And we also came to recognize that there are not many, if any, facilities in industrial areas, things that people need when they are finishing a long haul trip. You really want to be able to clean up after the mandated 10 hours in a truck. So while we aren't there realistically, this is kind of beginning to give you an idea of what the needs are at a city level and frankly in an industrial area too. Before I go too much further, I want to just kind of highlight where we are. We're in Seattle, and we're talking about basically just about the northwesternmost portion of the United States. A number of people within our region. We're a significant portion of the population. And what most people don't really catch on to is that Alaska really got its start by being the jumping off. Washington State got its start, and Seattle specifically, by being the jumping off point to Alaska. And it continues to be a really critical connection point for goods and services from the contiguous United States up into Alaska and certainly also into Hawaii. So there's a lot that goes on in the background in terms of industrial movement, goods movement, and in fact, Washington State is about 40% of the economy, I believe, dependent on trade and goods movement. So there's a lot going on, and we have a big interest in how we're doing things. This map, for lack of a better way of saying it, is kind of a heat map for truck parking. We have other maps that also discuss congestion and number of trucks. And really what it comes down to is the Seattle-Tacoma area within about a 25-mile stretch of the Interstate 5 holds about 10% of all the Washington State trucking. So it's really intense in terms of import and export. So this is kind of the background on why we were interested in truck parking, why we were looking to find answers for what turns into kind of a really specific form of congestion, especially in our industrial areas, but that also bleeds over into neighborhoods adjacent to these industrial locations. So I'm going to give it to Trevor to talk about what he did and what went on. So thanks. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. So thanks, Chris. So this is a relatively simple project to provide overnight parking for truck tractors, not the tractor trailer that you see in the highlighted in red there. But basically to keep them in close proximity to the port terminals rather than having them drive long distances only to park and then return the next morning to come back to work. So the reason this is an important project is because the Port of Seattle is serviced by about 1,800 independent trucks and drivers, And as Chris indicated, that we have studies that indicate there's about 500 to 900 trucks that park overnight on Seattle streets. So these large vehicles are restricted to parking in areas zoned for industrial uses, as highlighted in pink on the map on the left. But as you can see, parts of the industrial areas are heavily residential. That's Soto, Georgetown, South Park, and Rainier Valley neighborhoods. And as you can see, the Rainier Valley is just number 5 on the map there. Just has a tiny little bit of the industrial zone, but there are trucks that are parking all over that neighborhood. So in terms of resident concerns with large trucks, one, they're taking up on-street parking spaces in front of their homes. So if they want to take groceries inside, they have to walk, longer distances. The trucks are circulating on residential streets looking for parking. So that also creates potential conflicts between pedestrians and bicycles and other vulnerable users. And then they idle loudly in the morning hours when they start up. So to this end, the SDOT team worked with the Port of Seattle and the Northwest Seaport Alliance and the City Council, who passed legislation to allow for dedicated on-street overnight truck tractor parking. So in terms of the legislation details, the legislation established the authority to designate parking for truck tractors in the public right-of-way. It also allows for enforcement. So vehicles that are not truck tractors that are parked in those spaces outside the designated hours can be cited. And then the last part of that is the SDOT director's rule. So we had to create a special document that talked about the criteria for citing exclusive truck parking and also the public engagement process as part of the legislation. So we looked at a few different locations, but our focus remained on beginning with a successful pilot. This was the first time we did this that met the following criteria, as you can see on the screen. So it had to be an SDOT right-of-way, obviously, make sufficient use of existing right-of-way, compatible with the adjacent and nearby land uses. So it couldn't be in retail or residential zoned areas. Had to be in close proximity to the port terminals or where the trucks are being used on a daily basis. Easy access to the arterial network, so we don't have trucks circulating on non-arterials that are not designed to hold those truckloads. And then sufficient potential scale. So we want to be able to have at least 20 parking spaces in that area for it to be viable, rather than having 5 here, 10 there, and so on. So we looked at locations number 1 and 2 that are highlighted on the map there on Harbor Island. And then there's a little aerial on the far right showing these locations, which we'll talk a little bit more about as we get into public outreach section, which is the second part of the director's rule tied to the legislation. So this is 13th Avenue Southwest. It is a 100-foot right-of-way with a 30-foot concrete roadway in the middle with no specific uses for the shoulders, the 35 feet on either side. The concerns from the adjacent property owners, which in this case are Shell Oil and Kinder Morgan, were the fact that some truckers were parking their chassis and then detaching and going off to pick up another load somewhere. They were concerned about trash and debris, as you can see in some of the photos here. And then they were also concerned about the cargo container, or the containers in the cargo in the containers, sorry. As you can see, there's in the top picture there's a container that's detached from the truck tractor. And these guys, Kinder Morgan and Shell, they have combustible material in their tank farms. And so not knowing what's inside these these containers that are right next to their facilities is problematic. So the second location, it basically looked like a parking lot for the adjacent businesses, but was in fact in city right-of-way. So we ended up making better use of this area and still provided adequate parking for the businesses. But the businesses still had concerns before we installed this. They were concerned about unsavory activity with new people coming into their, into sort of their parking lot, which is again public right-of-way. The trash that could pile up, and then the loss of dedicated business parking. In terms of implementation, it was pretty pretty quick to implement this. We did it over one weekend. We got all the spaces installed. We restricted parking, and we put flyers on the trucks like in the week leading up to the weekend, just to make sure that we didn't have to tow anybody or work around any trucks. And then in the overnight hours, we picked up debris and swept the area so it'd be dry for the morning. And then we removed the concrete blocks in coordination with the adjacent businesses who set them out there, the ecology blocks. And then, as you can see, we striped the parking spaces 11 feet wide by 29 feet long to accommodate the trucks. We installed signs on the concrete walls and fences with the adjacent property owner's permission. That was just a better option than putting in, posts that would potentially become a maintenance nightmare. And then we installed oversized wheel stops and pinned them in place just to give the trucks an idea of where to stop and that they wouldn't move from where they were placed. In the end, we added about 110 truck parking spaces, and we advertised these through the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And then truckers began using the spaces on 13th Avenue Southwest, which is the location number 1 on the left. And then it took a little bit more outreach to the truckers. It actually took about a year before they actually started using the 11th Avenue Southwest location, which is the location number 2 on the right. In terms of operations, we found that once the truckers took over a spot with their truck tractors, they would swap it out in the middle of when they arrived at work with their personal vehicles. So their personal vehicles would be parked there during the daytime, and then their trucks would be there in overnight hours. If there's a day that the trucks weren't working, the trucks could remain without getting ticketed. They are allowed to be there 24/7 in those spaces. And then in the end, we ended up checking with the adjacent property owners, and they actually thought it worked better than they were anticipating. They found that the truckers were good stewards of the spaces, and it was definitely more organized than it had been in the past. So in summary, these spaces provided on Harbor Island were well received by both the truckers and the adjacent property owners. We ended up getting fewer calls from residents in neighborhoods where the trucks had been parking overnight. Reduced the need for these trucks to drive again to other nearby neighborhoods, only to drive back the next morning, reducing VMTs and also carbon emissions. And then it helped to reduce the presence of large trucks in the residential areas and all the issues that came with that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, great, thanks.
To talk about tasting.
Yeah, and so really when Trevor talks about it was an easy implementation, he's kind of glossing over the amount of time and effort that it took to get people together to talk about what was going on, what we wanted to do, and how we thought things would turn out. But once we had those first spaces in, a couple of things happened. As he alluded to, it turned out better. People were taking care of the area because they felt a bit more ownership. And as a result, another team of mayor's encampment remediation team began to take a look and see how they could start activating different areas in the industrial zones. And what ended up happening is we sort of formed a partnership, maybe without meaning to, but it's working well. If there are locations where there are encampments that are beginning to really spike, we'll call it unsavory activity. And the remediation team is looking for a way to activate the space once they've had a cleanup in the area. They come and check whether or not truck parking is a valid opportunity. And our first experiment and work with this, after we've had our successful pilot, was in a street called Denver Ave South. What you're seeing on the image at this point in time is where we've just marked a set of spaces. The area has been cleaned. It was actually really festooned with litter and other, frankly, we'll call it biohazardous waste. And once it was cleaned up and we could get an activation in, we ended up coming to the same set of outcomes. Once there was feeling of ownership, once the business owners knew what was going on and were able to buy into it, the end result has been a very high utilization of the right-of-way. as well as a much cleaner set of outcomes. Again, as people have bought into this as being something that they can use and can do consistently. So the outcome has been such that at this point in time, with this 60 parking spaces here, another 40 in another location, we're closing in on 220 odd truck parking spaces, which is about half of what we think we need to get a really good, stable truck parking inventory. And we're getting support out of this. This is really a good outcome in a number of ways. And where, ironically, the same encampment team that I'm talking about that did this, I got an email this morning that said that they've only had 3 complaints in this area since we made the installation, I think in April, when it was nearly a daily outcome. So the reduction in concerns, the improvement in right-of-way is really great. And where we are at this point in time, great, we're happy, things are going well. But as Trevor had mentioned, we don't want to do anything in less than 20 unit spaces. This is not a great answer for every location. And certainly we want to talk to the adjacent land use and business owners, because our goal is not just to come in, drop by and say the equivalent of, hi, we're from the government, we're here to help you, and then just do something that nobody really could benefit from. So it is a very interactive process, and it's really focused on making sure that the people who have the greatest need, both the business owners and the truck drivers, get a positive outcome. Last note here, the drayage truck drivers, and again, this is my personal soapbox I'm taking over. The work they do is, or the work done by a drayage driver is usually done by a person who is a first-generation immigrant. English is a second language for them. Their truck can well be third hand. They will sometimes wake up at 4 in the morning to get there. See, I'm doing these numbers. And the last one is 5. They're usually in this job for about 5 years before they license in the US for their original work. So there's a really great story about developing oneself, coming in, taking on a living wage job, and literally embracing a part of the American experience. And it's really cool that at this point in time, while it may sound small, we've set up some truck parking that helps make this a little bit easier to do. So given that, I don't want to go too much further on my own soapboxes. Thank you very much for letting us take the time to talk about this, and we appreciate it. So I'll hand it to Kimberly.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, because I've never thought about where do all these trucks park, because we have the Port of Oakland here in the Bay Area, and it's never occurred to me, I don't know how we would deal with that. So absolutely fascinating to hear your presentation. So we do have a few questions in the chat. So we have about 10 minutes left for our webinar today. So I'm going to try to get through as many of these as we can before I wrap up with a few closing remarks and announcements for the group. So the first question that I have here is for Ali. We have a question about the use of VMT. So the use of VMT for various environmental clearance and similar evaluations was due to the governor's office decision to implement legislation requiring a review of VMT as an alternative to transitional level of service as the prime metric to replace LOS with VMT. And many California jurisdictions have continued to utilize LOS along with VMT. So what has San Diego done in this regard? Do they still look at LOS in some situations?
So the short answer would be yes, they look at LOS for certain developments at certain size, but it is not done as part of the environmental clearance process. So VMT does the environmental clearance, and the down here we call it local mobility analysis. The LMA report, which has the LOS results, would kind of complement basically what other improvements would be needed to kind of improve the network and reduce the delays, but it's not part of the clearance process.
So we had another question about the tool that you built, related to VMT. Is the city's approval process like flexible to allow new or, outside the box mitigations that are not part of the list, like pre-populated in the tool itself?
Uh, uh, yes, so the city allows for that. The tool does not allow for adding any custom calculations to the VMT reductions, but if I would say if the measure, if the out of box measure does not have overlap with any of the measures selected from the tool, they can take the numbers from the tool, and in a separate process, they can apply the reduction from that new um, basically TDM method or whatever to calculate the VMT reductions.
Well, I put you on the spot quite a bit. So let me go over to Chris and Trevor a little bit to ask them some questions that I see here in the chat. So there's a question here that notes that, you mentioned that it was an interactive process to figure out the parking for the truck tractors. So how long did it take to kind of go from initiation to implementation? And, are there opportunities to streamline this sort of work in the future?
Yeah, it really didn't take that long. It was probably about 9 months from start to finish, including the council process. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what he's talking about is the initial, how we began, and that's basically dealing with legislation. Getting that through council. Nothing ever goes quickly through any council that I've ever heard. So if you're listening, Seattle Council, we do care. The outcome took time too, because you had to talk to both Kinder Morgan and Shell and then the board.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it probably took 9 months to maybe 9 months to a year, actually, in retrospect. It's been a long time since we started with phase one. It's been about a couple of years. And so, but anyways, it took a long time. It took time to work with the adjacent property owners and really just explain to them what we're doing. They were always I guess leery of our approach. But I think in the end, they, in following up with them, we said we wouldn't leave them, hanging if there was ever any issues. We'll figure it out together. And so we followed up with them, and they weren't having any issues. It was just more organized. It was clean, and yeah, it was working pretty well. So
and so once Trevor did all the hard work, and that really is the case. It's really the truth. I decided to start taking credit, and the phase two and other phases have gone much more quickly. We actually have to do a SEPA, a state EPA review, which takes about 6 weeks. So we can't really shrink it down below a 6-week timeline, but we can work in parallel to do the public outreach, discuss with the adjacent land uses, and meet our director's rule requirements. So we are being asked to bring in truck parking as potential options at this point in time.
Oh.
And that's a big plus.
Yeah.
Rarely do they say hi, truck group. Yeah.
So I know you spoke about a phase two in your presentation. How many more of these sites are you looking at implementing?
Well, as we've learned what we can do, we're trying to do a stretch for this. We as the city are committing to a lot more greening and green stormwater infrastructure. And so what we're trying to do is tie the truck parking and GSI together. So when we do some installation, maybe it's only at the ends, we can green the ends of our parking areas. And so the answer is yes, we're trying to advance this. And I've got I'm going to call it 2 locations right now that I would love for us to do. And we're trying to find how many opportunities we can check off at the same time. Like I said, greening, maybe roadway restoration, or not having to restore some certain sections. So again, trying to get our best answer out of this.
No, I absolutely love that, especially the green infrastructure part and trying to bring a little more to it than just simply, parking. That's really great. So I have one last question for Ollie that's here in the chat. Back to the tool that was created. What feedback have you gotten from local developers and also from city staff? Like, is it actually helping to provide more efficiencies and more clarity and just improving the overall process of calculating VMT?
Yeah, so we have got positive feedback from the city that the tool is being used by developers, and I think the big efficiency that it brings in is there are less things. So city is already busy with a lot of stuff, and they don't have to spend a lot of time kind of quality controlling the outputs. If it was done by several different consultants, they provided in different formats. So it's like a universal format where everybody goes in, do the same exact math, and then because we have developed the process, we trust the outcomes of it. And the city, at the end, I would say that it says in the guidebooks and all the, I believe some of the pages that the city reviews the information, but it definitely makes it easier on their end to review some of the mathematics and stuff like that.
And how are developers feeling about it? Like, are they finding it useful and helpful as well?
I would think so. I haven't directly talked to any developers that have used the tool, but I would think, I mean, compared to my experience from a couple years ago where we had to fill out those forms and like we had questions, go to the city, what is this field, like what number should I put in? I would say it should be positive, but I haven't directly talked to any developers.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time today to share your work with us. I'm going to share my slides really quickly and wrap up this webinar. So let me just bring this back up. So again, congratulations to all of you for, winning awards in the planning and traffic engineering categories from the Western District this past year. I have everyone's contact information here, so I'll have this up here really quick. So, those that are tuning in for the webinar can jot down your emails in case they have any follow-up questions. So I'll give it like another second or so. And then for those of you that are here for today's webinar, if you are looking for PDH credits for this, please go to our website where we have more details on how to complete the PDH process. We will also send out an email to all of you so that you have that as well. And we have one final webinar in this series. In January, we will hear from our award-winning TISMO project. So please join us on January 15th at noon for that presentation. And then just some final announcements from the Western District. For any students that are on the call tomorrow is your last day to submit your proposals for the Student Data Collection Project. For those of you that are interested, we are opening up nominations for our Transportation Project of the Year. You heard from 2 projects today. You heard from 2 last week, and there's 1 more in January. But every year we do have an annual awards program where we do ask our members to submit nominations for Transportation Project of the Year. So those are due on March 1st. You have plenty of time to put that together. There's more information on the Western ITE website, and you can also reach out to our technical committee chair, Jeannie Akutanza. And then finally, this is really planning far ahead, but our Western District annual meeting will be in Long Beach later this year from June 29th to July 2nd. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy your holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Jeannie, we can